Welcome to Adventures in Surgical Weight Loss with Dr. R. I'm Dr. Richard Rasmussen. I'm a bariatric surgeon and excited to bring you another story from a surgical weight loss patient. My goal is to give patients a place where they can share their amazing stories. I get to hear these stories all the time. I hope through this process to get rid of some of the bad information that exists about surgical weight loss. Today we get to hear Clyde Munson's story. He's just over 2 years out from a gastric bypass. He's lost 220 pounds. It's made a big change in his life. We also spent some time talking about the decision-making going into surgery, gastric bypass versus sleeve, which was better for him. He had a large ventral hernia, which complicated the issue, and so we spent a little time talking about that. We also talk about his post-operative experience with massive blood clots. And as many know, that can be a life-threatening situation. Fortunately, it was not for him, but we spent a little bit of time talking about that. So very fascinating story. I think you'll really like getting to know Clyde Munson better. Today, I have the opportunity to sit down with Clyde Munson. Clyde, thanks for joining me.
Absolutely.
Why don't you go ahead and tell us your story?
Okay, well, I'm 52 years old. Do not meet the minimum requirements to be an astronaut, but that has nothing to do with this. I've been overweight and heavy my entire life. Growing up, I had to shop out of the Husky section of the kids' catalog. I probably started a couple fires walking in corduroys with my eyes rubbing together. When I was in, strange thing now is the waist size of my pants right now is the same as I was wearing in 6th grade. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah. So when I was in high school, marching band, I had the biggest uniform available. And so I've struggled all along. When I got into college, I was in martial arts and really active and in the gym a lot and still struggled with the weight. That's when I found one of the most effective diets I've ever been on. I got strep throat for 2 weeks, couldn't eat anything, and lost like 35 pounds in 2 weeks.
Oh, my goodness.
It was incredible, but it was, the result was great. Getting there was terrible. Do not recommend that diet to anyone. And then from there, married, kids, and it seemed like every birthday came another 10 pounds. And so 35, I was 350. When I hit 40, I was 400, and it just kept going. I did, before paleo was a thing, I did one of those diets, and it worked well for a while, but it's hard to maintain that. Your options are so limited on what you can eat, and so that worked for a bit. At one point, I got an app called Spark People, and you could enter in your calories, and it would track that. And that was when I first got that. I put in my weight, and it says, "How much do you want to lose?" And I'm like, 2 pounds a week, and it said, "You're crazy." And I said, "No, that's what I want to do." And so it gave me 2,600 calories a day to lose weight at the weight I was. And for a week, I just tracked what I was normally doing. And I was around 2,000 to 2,200 calories. And at that, I wasn't, losing anything. I was gaining slowly. So I thought, well, that isn't going to work. Dropped down to 1,800, 1,500. Finally got where I could lose maybe a pound a week, between 1,500 and 1,200 calories. Also, normally really hard to maintain. I think I probably do that now without even thinking about it. But back then, that was tough. And then
I might just point out that that's one of the things we discuss about the value of a surgical stomach is, with your genetic profile, your genetic makeup, your body just is very efficient with the calories. It just doesn't, your metabolic rate's low basically. And so to maintain a lower weight, you have to consume a lot fewer calories. And on a normal sized stomach, that's just much more difficult. And so one advantage of a surgical stomach is that you can eat those smaller amounts, be satisfied, and do that long term.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, now I think 1,200 calories, that might be a little bit much. It's easy, but back then that was miserable.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I developed a hernia, and I went in and met with one of the doctors in your office that has since retired, and he pretty much said, "Yeah, you're too fat to fix, but we could work on this." And at the time, I didn't have insurance that would cover it, so I'm like, "Well, great." So for years, I dealt with the hernia, and there were days it was fine, and other days it was just excruciating, miserable to deal with. Got to a point where got insurance through my wife's employer, and she's like, we got to do this. It's past time. And so we came in, jumped through all the insurance hoops and all the other hoops. And at the time, the hernia was a concern. You and I had talked about doing a sleeve, and I did a bunch of research and read about it. And I'm like, I'd rather do the bypass. It just seems like you have a better chance to lose more and have more success long term. Not saying that the sleeve wouldn't work for a lot of people. I just thought that the bypass would work better for me. And the concern was, there's going to be some adhesion or something with that hernia. And so at the end of it, we decided, when you get in there fishing around, whatever happens, happens. And so you were able to do the bypass, and it worked. All worked out.
Let me make some clarifying points just from a medical standpoint. So for those who don't know what a hernia is, it's a hole in the abdominal wall that allows the intestines to poke through, and then they get into the fatty tissue under the skin. And as you mentioned, those can be painful. They can cause bowel blockages. So there's lots of potential problems with them. And particularly in the middle of the abdominal wall, there can be a high recurrence rate with certain factors, and weight is one of those factors. And so national recommendations currently are to be below a certain BMI before trying to fix those types of hernias. And so those are all things we discussed. And as you and I talked about sleeve versus bypass, in that type of a situation with a large hernia and a bunch of intestines stuck in it, it's going to be easier to do a sleeve because we just work with the stomach and we can leave the intestine alone. But with a bypass, we have to have that small intestine to be able to bypass it, of course. And so we talked about, the difficulty that might represent. And I've had a situation before where we spent hours trying to free up scar tissue to try to do a bypass and just, weren't successful in the end. And so that was, coloring our discussion some as we talked about that. And then the other thing I think that is very significant with your history is when we sent you for the preoperative endoscopy to look at your esophagus, you had grade D, which is the worst, esophagitis. So reflux was a big concern. As I recall, you didn't really feel it.
Right. I had no idea I had reflux that bad, other than, there were a few times that I would get stuff caught in my throat and have to go to the endoscopy, get it pulled out. That's a fun experience. Don't recommend.
Definitely not. And that's caused by the scarring from that reflux and that inflammation we saw. So really the best operation for you in that situation was the bypass, because it can decrease that acid exposure on the esophagus. So that was, as you mentioned, that was our goal, but there was the concern with this hernia. And I might just mention that we got in, and it did take us, a couple of hours just to get that hernia reduced, to get it to a position where we could...
I was asleep.
But to get it to a point where we could proceed with the operation. And then If we leave that hernia, then the risk of intestine getting stuck in that after surgery is higher. And so we closed it just with sutures, which has a high recurrence rate, but at least gets you through that early postoperative period. And you and I discussed before that you did have a recurrence you didn't know about when you got your gallbladder out. They saw it much smaller. They were able to close it up. And so anyway, just trying to help people understand the complexity of what that was in those decisions we were trying to make.
Yeah. I try not to be a pain in the neck, but stuff happens.
Well, wasn't anything you were doing on purpose.
Yeah. So once we had the surgery, I feel like I've had, great success with it. Highest weight was 470. When we started, I was at 454. I'm down to 250 now. So lost 200 pounds from, surgery, lost 270 from, or 220.
220, yeah.
Bad at math. 220 from, overall. So
that's fantastic. No, it's amazing. It's amazing. What are some of the benefits you notice not carrying all that weight around?
So mainly just energy. And, you hear people talk about it, and I was thinking, oh, I'm just going to have this big burst of energy like I've dumped, 12 cups of coffee. And it's really not that for me. It's more stamina. Like I would get home from work and sit on the couch and done. I had plans of what I was going to do after work, and never did. And now I go to work, I get home, I go work on my car or work on remodel stuff in the house, work on the yard. This time of year is terrible. So I'm going to have to find an indoor hobby, but no, just the stamina, climbing stairs, flight of stairs nearly killed me before. And now there was a time I'd get to the top of the stairs. Wait, why am I not winded? This is weird. It was just, and there's little things all along that that was weird. And the strange thing about it is, the weight loss is somewhat gradual, but those instances where you realize something about how different things are, those happen all at once. It's bizarre. But yeah, just that, working on my car, I used to have to make a plan, grab every part and every tool I thought I would need before I got down on the floor, because I had to figure out how I was going to stand back up. It was like a military operation. The Battle of the Bulge, I guess. That's probably copyrighted. But yeah, now I get down on the floor, stand back up, and don't think anything about it. It just, so that's been great. Awesome.
That's awesome. Tell us a little bit more about your cars. I know you have some unique cars.
So, when I was 13, my dad we had antiques before. He purchased a 1931 Model A Ford, and we restored it, and I have had a blast with it ever since. Drive it, we've got a club here locally and go on tour every summer somewhere, and just go in the parades. And I hate car shows because the car has all the fun and I do all the work. But do that. So it's a lot of fun. And then this year, my parents live in Ely. I went back. There was a 29 Roadster that I drove a bit in high school, and my coupe is my love. And so the Roadster got parked, and it's been sitting about 25 years. And, in amongst the time gaining weight, there was no way I could even get behind the wheel on the thing. And so after losing the weight, I'm like, I can actually drive that car now. So I went home, worked on it, and then drove it across the desert this summer, and I've been having fun with that. And it's, it's cool because top goes down and you can, enjoy 2 weeks in the spring and 2 weeks in the fall, and then freeze or bake.
Didn't you tell me that during this holiday season you drove around with the top down?
Yeah, yeah, because I'm dumb. There's a neighborhood over in Lehigh that I don't know what happened, but anyway, that it's full of inflatable Santas, all of them about 10 foot tall, and I'm like, oh, that would be fun to go, check out. So Christmas Day, I hopped in the Roadster and went out there and got out there, and it was cool, but I was glad to be home and under an electric blanket because I get cold easy. I did before when I was much better insulated. So now it's even worse. Like I get the chill so bad. That's the one negative of losing the weight is I get cold so easy.
It's amazing how often I hear that story that, people are like, yeah, I did okay before, but now I just, I've got to bundle up all the time.
Well, and I don't know, it might be age because my dad used to be able to handle the cold fine, and now, he's shivering at 40 degrees, so.
Now, as I recall, after surgery, you had some excitement, or not in a good way, but tell us a little bit about that.
So, yeah, so my 2 years ago, December 12th, I had the surgery. My wife and I had surgery on the same day because we're crazy.
That is, I'm going to take one little side tangent. That's a very interesting comment. I've done several couples, and some choose to do it on the same day, and others want to separate it. And I don't know if crazy is the right word, but it is that's a big jump when you're both doing it the same day.
Yeah, if you've got a good support system of people that can help you out, it's fine. But if you're just relying on each other while you're both recovering, that might be a challenge to a marriage. So anyway, we had surgery on the same day. And afterward, I felt fine, got up. We got home. I was feeling good. And then one day, I think it was probably maybe a week later or somewhere around there, I said, hey, let's go up to Cabela's and walk around because we got to get, walking. And thought I was doing good. Got up there, walked around the building, and I was struggling. I thought, well, I'm just out of surgery. It's just probably that recovery. I just need to keep doing this and rest. The next day, I was wiped out. And then the day after that, I'm like, okay, let's go down to the Provo Mall and just do a loop. Get out and walk. And I barely made it out of there. I thought, wow, this is going to be a rough recovery. And the day after that, I got up, went into the bathroom, and barely made it back to bed. And we had one of those oxygen meters, and I threw that on my finger, and I was down. I can't remember off the top. I was down. My oxygen saturation was in the 70s at that point. And then I laid there for a few minutes, and it went back up to 93, 94, and I'm like, okay. And so waited for my wife to wake up, and she got up, and I'm like, I don't know if things are okay. And I told her, and she's like, oh, we're going to the doctor now, you idiot. And so we went to the American Fork Hospital, went in the ER. They did a few tests. Well, the main thing is just getting from the car in there, wiped me out, sitting in the waiting room. They brought out the oxygen meter. I was at 93, 92. So, sorry. But when I got back to the room and got on the gurney, I had dropped to, I think, 64, 65. I was starting to get the black tunnel, sick to my stomach. And so they're like, okay, they roll me back, did a bunch of scans, and they're like, you have a blood clot in both of your lungs, and we need to take it out right now. And they were pretty positive with me. Oh, we've done this a bunch. We've got a high success rate. And I'm like, I want to hear about the not success rate. And they're like, well, that's people have comorbidities that really affect that. And I'm like, yeah, is one of those being overweight? Because like I just had surgery, but I'm still not, I'm still over 400 pounds. And they're like, oh no, you'll be fine. Meanwhile, they're telling my wife, call your kids. You need to be prepared. This could go bad. And they take me downstairs, strap me to a board. And I think the first time it really keyed into me, like, oh boy, the anesthesiologist is like, look, I can't knock you out for this because we need to be able to watch you and see that you're doing okay. It's like, but I'm going to give you something to calm you down. And I'm like, I'm actually pretty calm, but if you're handing out stuff, I'll take some. And so we were laying there, and I was laying there, and I was chatting with the anesthesiologist, and they're running the pipe cleaner up my leg through my heart to pull this blood clot out. And all of a sudden, like, I look over and I see everyone but the doctor and the anesthesiologist off to the side standing over this table, and they've all got their phones out, and they're just, wow, I've never seen, holy cow, oh my gosh. I'm like, what is going on? And the doctor's like, yeah, that's the biggest blood clot I've ever pulled out of anybody. And I'm like, well, in amongst all that, I was paying attention to that. I didn't realize my pulse had dropped, my oxygen went up. And then I'm like, wait a second, I feel great. And yeah, so doctor said I was about maybe an hour or 2 hours from dead. So, it was glad that worked out.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear those stories. I hate hearing those stories because, we do lots of different things to try to minimize risk, and yet stuff still happens. And so grateful that your wife was smart enough to say, we're going, and you went in and they were able to detect it and find it and act quickly and get it out. So yeah, definitely happy for the results of that story.
Yeah, I would just say as a recommendation to anyone, thinking about weight loss or any surgery, if, get up and move. If you think you're doing it enough, you might not be, so move a little bit more. A couple months after that, I had to have my gallbladder out. And so I'm like, oh, that ain't going to happen again. So the day after I was released from the hospital, I went to work because I work retail and I'm up walking around. I do about 5 miles a day, and I'm like, and oh boy, that was rough. I'm like, okay, maybe I went a little overboard, but I didn't get blood clots again. So.
That's awesome. Wow. Yeah, it is. It's a fine line, and we use blood thinners. You were put on blood thinners afterwards. We obviously encourage walking, getting up and moving. That's one of the best ways to try to minimize risks. And with the blood thinners, it gets tricky because that can cause bleeding. Right. And so, it's that trade-off, and it's a fine line we walk a lot of times.
Yeah. And it wasn't, for the bariatric surgery, it wasn't, we didn't know anything. So when I had the gallbladder out, they're like, okay, we got to put you back on the blood thinners, but you got to be really careful. And it's, that caused some anxiety. But now I know anytime I have surgery, they're just going to have to throw Eliquis at me for a few months. Evidently, I'm one of those, wonderful people that like to have blood clots. Joy.
Yeah. Well, and again, I'm grateful for that outcome that it was discovered and treated. And quite honestly, that you were at a facility that could do it, that had the people that were able to do it. It's something we maybe don't discuss a lot. That not every facility can do that, or have individuals who are able to do that. And so there were lots of things that lined up for you. Big blessings involved there.
Yeah. For me, it turned out positive. I don't know about other people. They're like, oh, dang it. But for me, yeah, that was good.
That's awesome. What else should we know about your story?
I it's one of those things you always, I've watched a few of these and you ask people, what's your non-scale successes or victories? And, that's one I kind of have to lean on because on paper, I don't know, I'm still in an obese category. I'm not, morbidly obese or obnoxiously obese or irritatingly obese, but still, and BMI wise, which we can argue all that all day long whether that's a really good measurement or it's a measurement. But still on high blood pressure medication. I still have sleep apnea. So in that way, it's kind of like, but you know, climbing stairs, I feel better. My clothes are cheaper and easier to get. Just all around. Last year, a couple years ago, my wife, with her job, they take the high achievers on a trip, and they went down to Cabo, and she's like, "Let's go," and I'm like, "No." So I said, "Take your sister with you, have fun," because I just knew the experience of flying at my size was going to be just a misery because I had done it when I was at 400 pounds or 420, and it's just, airplane seats are not comfortable for thin people, so they definitely aren't made for me. So last year we were like, well, it's time. You lived through this blood clot thing. Maybe we should, do something fun. And so we went down to Mexico and had fun. But, I was like, I can get on a plane and not have to ask for an extender and not like destroy the person next to me or take up, buy two seats or all that. That was like one of the biggest thing. And I got in there and I still had like maybe a micron between my knees and the seat in front of me, which that had never happened. And it wasn't much space, but there was space there. So, that was great just to be able to get on a plane and fly, and just, go on vacation and experience life. The other thing that's kind of weird to me, they talk about body dysmorphia, and that's a thing. Like when I was 450, I didn't recognize how big I was, and now I still, like, I'll walk past a mirror or I'll see a picture of myself standing with somebody, and I'm like, wait, and I have to do a double take. Is that me? So, I'm on both sides of the spectrum now of, now I wasn't that big and I can't be that small. It's a weird place to live.
Interesting. Well, as we wrap up here, what advice would you give anyone who's considering weight loss surgery?
Get up and walk afterward. A lot. One thing that was strange for me that I wish I would have done more is just pick a few people that, I knew that I could share my successes with, and they would, just give me some positive feedback. Cause at 450, whatever your weight is, when you're overweight, like, and I did it all the time. When somebody wanted to take a picture, I would stand behind somebody else or stand behind the car or turn sideways because I thought I maybe looked thinner that way. And so went through this period of, trying to blend in and not be noticed, because obviously when you're that size, you're noticed. People know, and you don't want to be noticed for that. And so as I was losing weight, when you're 450 pounds and you lose 10 pounds, nobody notices. When you're 100 pounds and lose 10 pounds, people notice. So it's kind of one of those weird things. But I don't know if I had a long way just let people know, and then they could say, hey, awesome job, good. Because I got to a point where I had lost a lot of weight, and then people really started to notice. And it was strangely uncomfortable because I'm like, here I've been going my entire life trying to not be noticed for how I look. And now I'm being noticed for how I look. And even though it's positive, it's uncomfortable. Like it's the brain is a weird thing. And so I guess that would be a point of advice I would have, is just share those successes with someone, even though they're not readily visible. So you get more comfortable and more used to people complimenting you, because it's going to happen whether you want to. I mean, that's one of those things. People get noticed, people get talked about how they look all the time. And even though, as polite society, we're not supposed to do that, it happens. And I think if it would have been easier for me to accept had I built up to it, rather than all of a sudden here I've lost 100 pounds and now people are like, wow, you look great. Oh, you mean I looked like crud before? Yes, I did, but you didn't. And that's what
But now you're emphasizing that.
That's where your mind goes. It's like, oh, I looked terrible before. Thanks. So, that's one thing I would share. That was it, and it still is kind of weird. People like, man, you look good. And, my default is always, there's a first time for everything. It's hard for me to take a compliment and say, hey, thank you. It's been a journey, and I'm, thank you. I still struggle with that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to that point, definitely has been a journey, and you've done a lot of hard work. And so congratulations on what you've accomplished. That's very, very meaningful.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of diminish it because I'm like, the surgery made something possible that for my entire life had been impossible. And so compared to what I've done before, it's kind of easy. It's been easy. But it hasn't. It is a lot of work. It is a challenge. And it's a tool that helps, but I still have to be active. I still have to, and thankfully my job makes that, whether it's easy or not, it makes it necessary, I guess is the best way. I have to get up and walk, and so I haven't needed that motivation to get out and move. The paycheck is the motivation to do that, I guess. So, but yeah, it is work. And sometimes I'm like, oh man, I kind of diminish it like, oh no, this has been really easy, but it hasn't. But it's easier than what I was doing before. 'Cause I've been able to lose some weight, keep it off for a while now, and, experience that success. It's been awesome.
That's great. Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing your story. Thanks for spending some time with me today.
Absolutely.
Thanks again to Clyde Munson for sharing his story. If you are listening to this podcast, I would recommend you go to my YouTube channel, Dr. R. Richard Rasmussen, and watch the video so you can see his before and after pictures. Quite a transformation. He also takes them next to the old vintage cars he works on, which was fun. So thanks again to Clyde. Please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. It will help us reach more people with these amazing stories. I also have a YouTube channel where you can see this video, as well as several other videos about surgical weight loss, general surgery, and robotic surgery. Join us next time for another amazing story.